Hello, folks. Pat McQuaid here at the Pat McQuaid Podcast. I am super pumped to introduce our next guest, Justice Bob Flanders. Bob was an associate justice on the Rhode Island Supreme Court for many years, led the city of Central Falls through bankruptcy proceedings, and was also the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in 2018. Pull up a chair and let's get going. Yeah, I remember coming over asking if I could use your trampoline, and there was a lot of chaos that went on in your backyard.
Well, we had a spa set up there with the pool and the tennis court and the trampoline. And
yeah.
So we were an attractive nuisance for a lot of neighbors like you that would want to come over and partake in some activity. But we were thrilled with it because it was a great way to get to know folks and be an active part of the neighborhood.
Oh, for sure. And, like I said, it is so great that you're one of the inaugural guests here today. And would love to hear. So we knew each other when I was growing up in East Greenwich. But so can you give me a little bit of background on yourself, where you grew up, and, a little bit of your backstory?
Sure. So I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up on Long Island, New York.
I didn't realize that.
Oldest of 7 children.
Okay.
My father was a food salesman. My mother was a housekeeper. We lived in North Massapequa, New York. I went to high school, though, after attending public schools in Plain Edge, New York. That was the name of the school district. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in Mineola, New York, called Chaminade High School.
Oh, Chaminade, very well known.
Which was run by the Marianist brothers, so that was quite a formative experience. Going to school there for 4 years, and then after graduating, I went to Brown, and that's my one major connection with Rhode Island that led me here.
Yeah.
I met my wife while I was at Brown. She was a student at a place called Newton College of the Sacred Heart up in Newton, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Which is now BC Law School
I was
in terms
just
of the
gonna
physical
say,
campus.
Yeah, I went to BC undergrad. So
Okay,
yeah.
so you're familiar with that area, and we met and were married actually a week before I graduated. I was 21, she was 19. That would not happen today.
No.
But we've been married for 54 years.
54 years.
Yeah, have 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren.
Oh, amazing.
The bad news is the 5 grandkids are all out on the West Coast.
Yeah.
My oldest girl is a math teacher at a prep school called the Menlo School in Menlo Park out there in California in the Silicon Valley.
Head of the math department,
Yeah,
I believe.
she
right?
is. She is, and she was quite a good student. Went to Dartmouth, graduated summa cum laude in math and economics, and married a private equity guy from Stanford.
Yeah.
After she graduated from Dartmouth College, and so she's been out there on the West Coast.
I was just summa cum laude to graduate. Okay, so that's
Good
something
for you.
to be admired. You know? Yeah.
So I have another daughter who, with another child. Danielle has 4 children. They're all teenagers now. And the other daughter, the middle daughter, Heather Flanders, is a screenwriter in Hollywood. She's married to a guy that's in the entertainment business out there as well as she. And they have this one child, a 6-year-old. And and I have a son here in Rhode Island, Zachary, who went to Bentley College and has a bar restaurant business in East Greenwich.
Yeah, and I've heard great things about the bar, and but Zach will make a great entrepreneur.
Well, he's got great people skills, but unfortunately, he's run into some bad luck because some rain came in through the roof of the bar, and he's been idled as a result of all the destruction that caused, and he's been trying to pursue insurance claims and work with his landlord to try and get back on his feet, but it's been a struggle.
Yeah. So where'd you go to law school?
So I went to Brown, English major, and then went to Harvard Law School for 3 years.
You couldn't get in anywhere else?
Well, I did get in, I think, some other places, but
Yeah.
I said it wouldn't be bad to have a Harvard law degree.
Right.
And I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a lawyer, but I wasn't positive or didn't have specific aspirations to do anything else other than play baseball. I was drafted as a baseball player out of Brown
What position?
by the Tigers. I was a outfielder and a pitcher, but they drafted me as an outfielder, and so while I was going to law school, I played in the minor leagues for the Detroit farm teams.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so that was interesting, and played in all kinds of places: Batavia, New York, Montgomery, Alabama, Clinton, Iowa.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
minor league baseball was a trip because it's very entrepreneurial. In Iowa, for example, we were in farm country, and they would auction off a pig in the seventh inning just to get the crowd to come in, and yeah. So we would be traveling on unair conditioned buses, and it was we were just married. I got married a week before I graduated from Brown, and then I took off for the minor leagues with my new wife, and so we got to see a few parts of America that would not have been available to me had I just pursued a more usual course, let's
Right.
put it.
Yeah. So how long did you go in the minor leagues
So
before you started?
went for 3 years in the minor
Oh,
leagues.
wow. So it was a real
Yeah, it was a real job, and,
Yeah.
and then at the end of it, I went up to the farm director and an old Detroit ball player called Hoot Evers. Hoot, it was his name, Hoot, and I said to him, Mr. Evers, I'm now finishing my third year in minor league baseball, and I've been up to the AA level, and I said, what do you think in terms of my chances here? And he said, son, I think you're going to be a heck of a lawyer someday.
Yeah.
And that was his message to me that,
Yeah.
you might not put
Yeah.
all your eggs in the baseball basket.
Yeah.
And so I basically decided to stick with the law, and then took a job in New York City for a big firm, Paul Weiss and Rifkin, and worked there for a couple of years before coming back to Rhode Island after, unfortunately, my wife was mugged in Central Park.
Oh, no.
And that soured her on the whole New York situation. She
Understandable.
wasn't hurt or anything, but
Yeah.
it was scary.
Enough to shake her up.
Enough
Yeah.
to shook her up and saying, let's see if we can't find a better situation back in New England. And
Right.
so I came back to Providence and took up with a big law firm there for maybe 10 years, and then founded my own law firm. And then after, I guess, 8 years or 10 years or so, was named to the bench or nominated to the bench by the then Governor Almond.
Okay.
I was not a trial judge, but he nominated me to be an appellate judge on the 5-person Rhode Island Supreme Court, and I would be one of the 5 judges if I was confirmed, which happily and luckily I was.
Yeah.
What
What was that like when you were named to the Supreme Court? Was that, had you wanted that job? Did it come out of the blue, or?
Well, I had been involved peripherally in some political things. Governor Almond was a former prosecutor, a Republican governor. I was a Republican, and I thought it would be an interesting job because as a lawyer, you only see, so many types of cases, and as a Supreme Court judge in Rhode Island, you review all kinds of cases. Everything that can possibly end up in court, if it's appealed, gets to this one court. There's no intermediate appellate court.
Right.
So this court was reviewing everything, and I thought intellectually it would be a challenge to learn about all these different types of cases, and it was unusual in that many of the judges had been at least a trial judge but I had not been. I had just been in private practice, but I was in court. I was a trial lawyer, so I knew about courts and working in that environment. So I thought it would be a tremendous honor and responsibility to be one of the 5 judges that would basically be saying and ruling on what the law in Rhode Island was,
Right.
because that's the last resort. Most people don't realize that, yes, you have a U.S. Supreme Court, but that they only deal with federal issues.
Right.
Everything else is state law, and so this court had a lot of responsibility for state law issues, which is basically 95% of what average people deal with.
Right.
So that was a very attractive responsibility for me to do.
What were some of the big cases, or one big case that
Well,
sticks out
one of
in your
the
mind?
big case that sticks out was a series of cases arising out of the issue of separation of powers,
Yeah.
which under the state and federal constitutions, as you know from your civics and political science classes, the government is divided into 3 branches: judicial, executive, and legislative, and each is supposed to stay in their own lane
Right.
and not step on the other. And so the issues that came in front of Rhode Island, which had a long history of legislative domination of governmental processes, was whether the legislature could name its own people and cronies to executive boards and commissions that were typically within a different branch of government. And so that was the issue that came to the court. I took the position that no, that would violate separation of powers, to have legislators basically performing executive functions. And so I actually ended up dissenting from the court's position. The rest of the judges took the position, no, that's okay in Rhode Island because we have such a long history of legislative domination.
Right.
But the good news is that as a result of all of that publicity, the people decided to amend our Constitution to make it explicit that that could not happen and that legislators could not serve on boards and commissions that were executive in nature. And our Constitution ended up being amended to provide that couldn't happen going forward in the future. So that was very satisfying.
Oh, I can imagine. But I'm curious, who is in your Hall of Fame of great American judges?
Oh, well, the usual suspects, I would say, people like Oliver Wendell Holmes, Justice Brandeis, and for sure John Marshall, who was the first chief judge of the U.S. Supreme Court and laid down some great principles and cases that every law student reads about the judicial function to say what the law is, because there's nothing in the federal Constitution that actually expressly gives the Supreme Court the last word on the interpretation of the Constitution and other federal laws. But through Marshall and the court that he led, that principle came to be established of so-called judicial review of legislative and other executive actions to say what the law is. And the amazing part of it is that even though the Supreme Court has no power of the purse or other executive power, whatever it says has been accepted over the years by the American people as the last word on what the law is. And unless you amend the Constitution, which has happened 20 some odd times over the years, that's the last word. So the Supreme Court, although seemingly not a very powerful body because it's not elected and they don't have any ability to tax people or to enforce its own decrees, those rulings nonetheless have been accepted over the years, over the decades, the generations, and they are now, if not a co-equal branch, at least a very powerful one in Rhode Island, in the United States, as witnessed by the fights that occur over appointments to that court. It used to be that that would not be the case, but in recent years, it's every nomination becomes a battle because everyone has realized how important these judges are
Right.
in terms of what the law is and the public policy is,
And the lasting impact of it.
and the lasting impact, and
Right.
and the difficulty of overturning what they do
Right.
through normal legislative or executive actions.
Right. I want, all the discussion about separation of powers and the Supreme Court reminds me of Justice Scalia. One time I heard said, if you ask law students what makes our Constitution and what the founding fathers did unique, and they'll say, oh, it's the Bill of Rights. But he pushed back on that idea in that he said every banana republic in the world had a Bill of Rights, some that had a more substantive and extensive Bill of Rights. He said what makes America unique is that we have two equally powerful parts of the legislative part of the government, with both the Congress and the Senate, whereas in some places the Senate really is more honorific. And he also, and the separation of powers with the presidency and the judicial, and the fact that the presidency isn't merely, the president isn't a creature of the legislature.
That's right.
Right. And it's not the parliamentary system. And, while people say that, and I'm, paraphrasing Scalia here, while people say that, the gridlock is what really is holding America back down in Washington, he argued that the gridlock is actually virtuous because it prevents over legislation, which is the real enemy.
Yeah, the tyranny of the majority, as Madison and other founding fathers phrased it. Yeah, it's quite a unique system in the world, and it's all based on the concept of checks and balances between these competing branches of government. They often don't agree, and therefore you have to compromise if you're in the legislative or executive branch, often to make any progress. So, yeah, it's served us well over the years, but I think what distinguishes it more than anything else is the relative power of the Supreme Court and its rulings to be accepted by the people and the other branches of government, because, as you pointed out, other countries, including Russia, have these elaborate guarantees, so to speak, built into written documents, but they're really parchment tigers because they're not enforced, they're ignored, they're overridden by telephone justice. If Putin or some other powerful luminary picks up a telephone and says to a judge, "Hey, listen, we got to have this ruling because this is in the national interest and so forth." I mean, that kind of stuff probably goes on more than we would ever even imagine in places like Russia and elsewhere. Whereas in the United States, that would be absolutely anathema, and no Supreme Court judge, although many of them have had all kinds of connections with presidents, would ever accept a dictated ruling from another branch of government, and that would compromise their independence. So that reputation of being independent, and many presidents have regretted their appointments to the court because they appoint them thinking they're going to be this type of judge, and they end up doing a 180 on them in terms of the types of rulings, because once they realize they're independent in the sense that they owe no fealty to the appointing authority, that's a liberating concept, and so really their allegiance is only to the Constitution. Now, of course, there are varying ways of interpreting the Constitution. Are you a strict constructionalist? Do you consider practical matters in the way you rule? But at least the judges are independent and not being bought off by others in the government.
Short-term incentives and whatnot.
Exactly.
And it seems to me to be a great judge, you have to have a large appetite for academic and knowledge and wisdom of previous courts. So much more
Absolutely.
so than being a perhaps a trial lawyer or something like that.
No question about it. The job as an appellate judge is very much an academic one in that there's tons of research and writing. You want to know what all the precedents are that have come before. Are we in a situation where a court has already decided this, or are we in new territory? So it's reading and writing is the essence of it. Reading and researching the cases that have come before, and then writing up opinions on the cases that are now in front of you. And when I took the bench as a appellate Supreme Court judge here in Rhode Island, I was astonished at the amount of work it took to get on top of any one case. And yet here we were deciding 35 cases in 1 week of argument. And,
Right.
When you're a lawyer, you go to court, you're prepared on one case. As a judge on that type of a court, I had to be prepared to sit and listen to arguments and decide tentatively anyway, how we were going to rule on these 35 cases in any given sitting.
Right.
And so I was that initial shock of how the workload to try and understand and read and get on top of all these cases, to be in a position to say what you think the law is or should be in Rhode Island, based on these submissions that we were reading, was daunting, to say the least. And I couldn't understand how these judges, many of them were elderly, were able to do it. And what I learned is that the way to prepare as a judge on that type of court is different than you would prepare as a trial lawyer. Trial lawyer, you should know everything and anything about your case, whereas if you're an appellate judge with a large caseload, you've got to be more focused on the issues in the case and not necessarily all the facts and details. You can leave that to the lawyers, to your clerks. You get 3 or 4 clerks to help you get ready.
You live in the world of ideas and principles more so.
It's a very academic existence, and that's both a positive thing and a bane, because many of the judges felt that they were isolated and didn't have the contact with the outside world that they did as lawyers. I can remember coming back to the court after lunch one day, and I was shocked when my assistant said to me, "You have a phone call here." I said, "A phone call?" I said, "Who would be calling me?"
Right.
And so you didn't have that sort of interaction with other lawyers and the outside world. That even a phone call from somebody was a major
Event.
that somebody wants to talk to me.
Right. And later in your career, that certainly changed when I know that you worked in helped guide Central Falls through their financial difficulties. Could you speak a little bit about what was going on and what your work there was?
Sure. So that occurred back in 2012 or so. I was chairing at the time the Board of Regents for Elementary and Secondary Education, which was an executive appointment from Governor Kachiri, who was the governor at the time. After he left office, Governor Lincoln Chafee, was elected, and Central Falls, one of the smallest city in Rhode Island, 1 square mile roughly.
One of the smallest cities in the country.
Yeah,
right?
And the largest Hispanic, very poor at the time, and suffering financially, was teetering on the edge of insolvency and bankruptcy, and so the governor asked me if I would put together a team and work with the government as a state-appointed receiver for that city, and see if we could come up with a plan to ameliorate the problems they were suffering.
How big was the problem?
Well, for Central Falls, it was huge because they were running a $6 million annual operating deficit, structural deficit, on a roughly a $16 million total revenue budget. So for that small city, it was crushing.
Right.
And they didn't have the resources. it used to be a city that had quite a manufacturing base, and but that had all evaporated over the years, and they were suffering from poverty. From I think 60% of the population was Hispanic, and huge English second language people who were struggling to try and make their way in the world. So.
And what on the expense side, what was bleeding them so
Well,
heavy?
the key problem was they had committed to pension payments
Right.
for their retired employees that were unsustainable under the circumstances of the revenue that they were able to generate. The tax base had withered away, and so they just were unable to afford the agreements for their retired employees, and even the current employees were suffering because of that. So that was the major problem, and these were contracts, and so the issue was how do you deal with contractual obligations when a city can no longer afford to meet the payments that it had committed to make.
A lot of difficult conversations.
A lot of difficult, and fortunately, at least under one way to look at the situation, there was a federal bankruptcy statute for municipalities that had been rarely, if ever, invoked to address pension situations. And what this allowed was for the municipality to restructure these obligations in a way that it could afford, even if it meant not living up to the contractual promises that prior administrations had made. So normally you can't break a contract without paying damages.
Right.
But under this special provision of the bankruptcy laws, a municipality could do that as long as it was justified by its financial circumstances. And so you could put together a plan of recovery for the city that would alter these contractual obligations, and it had to be approved by the bankruptcy judge, and ideally also by the constituent people that were affected by this, including the unions and the retirees, the current employees, and so forth. So that's what we did. We went in there and with many difficult conversations. I remember having to stand before an auditorium at Central Falls High School of retirees and tell them that unfortunately that 50% of their pensions was going to have to be reduced because we simply couldn't afford it. And I put it in terms that in retrospect seemed very harsh to people, because I said, look, a haircut is still a lot better than a beheading.
Right.
And if we weren't going to be allowed to do this haircut, you're not going to get anything. You're going to have empty envelopes with no checks. And so I had to have state police escort me into and out of the meeting because of how angry people were. And I didn't blame them, because
they had been given a promise.
They had been given a promise, and now the government was unable to meet that promise, but it was illustrating the folly of government's
undefined benefit plans, right?
Exactly, and having poor management of the plans, not the correct expertise, and
it's the sins of the politicians of a previous generation.
Exactly, and so ironically, we negotiated with the unions, and they all agreed to this plan that we put together to have the city recover. It was a 5-year recovery plan. A lot of changes in the contracts and the pensions, but they all endorsed it, and we went before the bankruptcy judge, and of course he accepted it, and it became a plan that they had to adhere to for the next 5 years. And lo and behold, they started claiming themselves to be the comeback city, and they seem to have turned things around. Now, that doesn't mean all their problems are gone, but I think they're in a much better position financially now than they were.
I feel like the major analog for your work in Central Falls would be Detroit, right?
Yes.
Where they often speak about, I've got a book on my shelf at home that city resurrected, I think is what it was called. And how it just at some point the undefined benefits become unsustainable, and someone needs to come in there. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I commend you for having political courage in a way of standing in front of that auditorium full of people and having that really difficult conversation.
Yeah, but again, I was not an elected official, so right. I knew I didn't have to stand for election, and I didn't have to be popular. But it was still a very wrenching experience to do that, because you knew that people were hurting, and you're giving them a plan that seems very harsh.
Right. And these are people that are already, not living large by any means.
No, and the
right?
state at the time, which potentially could have bailed them out, eventually they did help them and bail them out in some ways, was unwilling at that time, because they were afraid that if they would set a precedent in Central Falls. I mean, there were other cities, Providence, Woonsocket, Newport, that were also struggling and having issues with their pensions. And so they were afraid of putting down a marker where the state would come in and bail out Central Falls, and then Providence and Woonsocket and Newport and other places that were suffering similar financial distress would then be pounding on their door, and the dollars there would be even that much greater.
Right. Go ahead.
So that's why Central Falls was basically orphaned by having to do this strictly through this bankruptcy process. Mm-hmm. Later, when times changed a little bit, the state did come in and relieve some of the financial burden that had been placed. They restored some of the pension money. In fact, I think ultimately they restored all of it after an initial haircut that they had to take. But initially, they didn't want to hear anything about it.
What's the current state of the municipal pensions in Rhode Island now?
Well, it's still very bad on the whole. Some places are worse than others, but they're still underfunded in the sense that they haven't set aside enough money. Many of the municipalities have now joined in the state-run pension plans, which are better managed than the ones at the local level. It's not as much of an amateur hour at the local level. So it's better, but it's still, I would say, in distress. And I would not be surprised if in the future there might be one or more other cities or towns that are in trouble. But one interesting feature of this bankruptcy option and why it's so reviled by politicians is that to invoke it, the state and or the city have to ask for relief under it. And what that means is that the local politicians, the mayor, the city council, they get shoved to the curb in favor of some stranger like me coming in and running the city. And it's basically, there has to be an admission of failure on their part. And of course, they don't want to do that. They want to say that they're going to handle it. And so the tendency is to kick the can down the road in these situations. And instead of coming to grips with the real fixes that need to be made to make the situation right, they don't do that. And they don't want to admit the failure that they deem it to be by having to call in some outside person to run the city. And that outside person is basically given dictatorial powers. You don't have to get approval of the city council, the zoning board. The normal political checks are gone. You're bringing in somebody with superpowers to break contracts and restructure the city under this federal bankruptcy provision, which is an amazing, almost an anti-democratic type of solution for these emergencies that occur. So that's one of the reasons why you haven't seen this replicated since Central Falls in Rhode Island, because
the politicians,
the Providences and others that could have invoked it, because they were certainly in bad straits financially, they don't want to step aside and bring in somebody that is not elected and tries to straighten out the city's financial problems without having to worry about being popular.
Right. And so you went through this experience, and then can you speak a little bit about your U.S. Senate run and what spurred you to do that, and how you enjoyed that process or disliked it or whatever.
Yeah. So in 2018, I was asked to consider running for the U.S. Senate, and I gave it some thought. I had been an elected councilman earlier on in my career in Barrington, where we were living at the time. I was now in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. As you know, Patrick, the Rhode Island Republican Party is a shadow compared to the Democratic Party in Rhode Island. The Republican Party doesn't have anywhere near as many registered Republicans as there are registered Democrats, although there are quite a number of now independents who can swing elections, and they may even be the biggest single group in Rhode Island, but they tend to be much more inclined to vote for liberal minded people, people who are running for office, and this was the 2018. You recall, was 2 years after President Trump was first elected to his initial term.
And presidents usually are at their lowest popularity after 2 years.
Yeah, and he was never popular in Rhode Island,
Right.
to say the least. And so immediately, once I put the R next to my name as a candidate, I became labeled as a Trumpian.
Yeah.
And I was running against a guy who had a long career in public life, Sheldon Whitehouse. He'd been a U.S. attorney. He'd been an advisor to a governor, and he had, of course, been already an elected senator. So I knew it was going to be an uphill fight.
Right.
But that was something that I was willing to take on, and in the hope that with a new Republican administration in power in Washington, I thought it would behoove Rhode Islanders to have at least one person elected from the party of the president down there in Washington to help Rhode Islanders make headway with this new administration, instead of having an all Democratic contingent that would not be warmly received by a new Republican administration.
Right.
But that argument, for whatever reason, apparently didn't resonate, and so.
What was it like campaigning? Take me through a typical day.
Yeah, well, you'd go to you'd see what public events you could be at. In my situation, I needed to raise my visibility, try to meet as many people as possible, take positions on issues that would contrast with the incumbent that I was running against. So I was always looking for opportunities to meet people, get out there. So I would have a very busy day, typically planned, going from one event to another, making speeches, trying to get media coverage, making press releases, and so it was a very active year of campaigning.
When did you decide to do it? And the election was obviously in November. How many? Is it a year-long campaign?
It was at least a year-long campaign. I would say roughly in November of the previous year would have been
when you turned it on.
When really started to turn it on and try and get publicity and
you got to raise money too. Right?
Is
that the worst part of the whole thing?
Without question. I absolutely hated to be turned into a political beggar, to solicit people for money. That was the absolute ultimate worst thing I had to do.
Right.
But I was able to raise over $1 million, but I also had to put in a lot of my own money.
Right.
Which we were saving for retirement, for grandkids, college education. So. But I was being advised that you got to show that you're willing to put your own skin in the game, money-wise, in order to be able to raise money effectively.
Right.
And the money that I was able to raise was, not even a fifth of what the incumbent was able
already had in the bank.
Already had in the bank, and was able to raise. So it was a mismatch in terms of being able to buy television time.
Right.
I mean, I was able to do it very modestly compared to what my opponent was able to do, and that's just the nature of challenging an incumbent in a blue state like Rhode Island,
Right.
where you're running with a big R next to your name against, with a president who is unpopular in this state, and
Right.
so that was a major handicap I
Yeah.
felt in trying to make any traction. I think in the end I ended up with maybe 38 or 39% of the vote compared to his 60 or 61%.
Yeah.
So.
Did you
know,
have fun? Like when you were out there on the trail?
well,
fun?
it was some of it was fun.
Yeah.
I enjoy meeting people. That was
Yeah.
always interesting, and there were a lot of characters and things
can
that you would run
imagine.
into. But the fundraising was the bad part of it, in the sense of not very comfortable. You had to keep doing it
Yeah.
in order to try and feed the beast.
Right.
By paying for all these ads that you were trying to put together and the like.
You know what's even, thinking at least the Senate, it's a 6-year term, whereas the Congress, like, could you imagine having to just beat the drum and raise money constantly?
Exactly. That's
know?
why and even the governor, although the governor now has a 4-year term, the governor in Rhode Island is much more of a retail politician
Right.
than, say, the U.S. Senate.
Right. Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to be at every opening of an envelope in the state.
Right.
Whereas there's a great public pressure to be seen and be at these events that occur that you see these politicians at.
Right.
Especially the local ones, the governor and the Congress people.
I feel as though being governor of a small state is a pretty good job. Like you're with the people, and I contrast it with being, in Texas or California or
Right.
Illinois. Like you can really wrap your arms around Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And that's probably a fun.
But the people can also wrap their arms around you, and they expect you to be available to
Right.
be wrapped around.
Right.
And so they want you to be visible and out there
Yeah.
24/7 almost. So I think it's a demanding job, but for the reasons you gave, it can be very satisfying, although in Rhode Island in particular, the governor is historically weaker than the legislature. Doesn't have a line item veto.
Yeah.
Needs to, schmooze or trade. I remember Governor Kachiri always lamenting that the legislature wouldn't do anything unless he was willing to give them judgeships that they could pick.
Yeah.
Whereas constitutionally, that's his responsibility.
Right.
But their currency was basically judges. They wanted judges that they could nominate, in effect, through the governor. And for him to get anything done, they kept insisting that, you want to do that? Fine, we'll support that piece of
So
legislation.
it's a constant trade.
Yeah, the log rolling of that kind of bargaining was overwhelming.
Is that what was the retail politics? Was that part of Buddy Cianci's recipe for success? Was he, in your mind, was he just an excellent retail politician?
Well, he certainly had the gift of gab. He could talk a dog off a meat wagon, and proceeded to do that. And so he was entertaining and ubiquitous in terms of being out there and he was very clever about some of the things, and as it turned out, he was too clever because he got caught with his hand in the political cookie jar eventually and had to go to prison
Right.
for it. But
I read his autobiography, and I think he called it a federally gated community.
gated community, he's famous for a lot of things that he said and did, and I remember one incident having to do with a private club in the state. I think it was maybe the University Club or
Right.
one of those. And he was having more difficulty getting admitted than he wanted to, and
Yeah.
so he told them that, look, you folks, just remember that the toe you're stepping on today is attached to the ass you're going to have to kiss tomorrow.
I like that. I'm gonna have to write that down right now.
Yeah.
You know?
So he was colorful, to say the
Right.
least,
Yeah, yeah.
about things like that.
Well, I wanted to wrap up with a lightning round, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, so
Sure.
just a handful of questions, and just your quick take on it. Favorite Rhode Island meal or restaurant?
Wow, there are so many. Rhode Island's blessed with many good restaurants. I always liked Capriccio's.
Yeah.
Great Italian food. I
Right
used
down
to,
here.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right locally, and always had good meals there. I used to have a tennis game with some folks on Thursday evenings, and we'd always come in and have a meal afterwards
Oh, that's
at
great.
Capriccio's, and got to know some of the people there. So,
Oh, good. A book you think everyone should read at least once?
ooh, well, I'm into audiobooks now.
That makes two of us.
And one of the ones that I'm in the middle of now is called "The Devil Reached Up to the Sky," and it's about the atomic bomb development that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the story behind it. And the way it's constructed, Patrick, is interesting because they interview not only just the scientists that were involved in the project, but the local people who were affected by it, and most dramatically and horrifyingly, the people who survived the Hiroshima bombing
Right.
and suffered all the incredible suffering that they went through
Yeah.
as a result of that. So, I mean, I think everybody, given the fact that the atomic age is still with us, and there are multiple countries now that have that capability, and a lot of political discourse is about should Iran be allowed to get the bomb and so
Yeah.
forth. It's really worth reading about that original atomic bomb and how, the debate over should we have dropped it, should we have used it at all, should we have first given them
A warning.
a warning. They were given warnings, but
Yeah.
we decided to drop it on civilian population centers like a city, which caused enormous suffering of children
And the argument being like we could have dropped it in the countryside to demonstrate the power of
Right.
it, right?
yeah. And people forget that Tokyo was being bombed in ways that incinerated a huge portion of the city.
I think more people died in the firebombing of Tokyo
I think you're right.
than Hiroshima. or
Exactly,
Nagasaki.
and despite all that suffering and destruction, Japan and its military rulers decided to spurn all demands that they surrender, and so that led to the very difficult decision that President Truman made to go ahead and drop the bomb. Not once, because they didn't surrender even after Hiroshima.
Yeah.
We had to drop another one on another city.
Right.
And so I just think that's a book people should read to recall the difficulty of that decision, the amazing power of these bombs, and the fact that we've had to live with that for all these years now, and it's still a threat.
Right.
Putin is still making threats to
Right.
drop bombs if we push him too far.
And we can't allow ourselves to become complacent. to
No,
that,
not at all.
You know. One last question: if there is one law that you could pass with, the snap of your fingers, what would you want to do?
Okay, that's a great question, and my answer is one that I put into one of the dissents that I wrote as a judge that I think is one of the best pieces of legal writing that I did, and that is the issue of whether our Constitution, our state Constitution, is enforceable, self-executing, without a legislature enacting laws that would say you can go to court to enforce it. The issue in the case was should crime victims who, under the Constitution, are entitled to be notified and an opportunity to be heard and receive damages before a criminal is sentenced,
Yeah.
should they be allowed to go to court to enforce that constitutional provision without the legislature basically giving their blessing and providing specifically for them to have that right?
Yeah.
And the court, over my dissent, ruled that until the legislature passes a law that says they can go to court to enforce that constitutional right, they can't do it. They're not. So I thought that was outrageous because basically I thought that gave the legislature a veto over constitutional provisions, which is supposed to be the supreme law of our land,
Right.
by doing nothing.
Yeah.
By doing nothing, they could veto these important laws. So I thought the judiciary ought to have the right to rule on these cases, even if the legislature doesn't allow them to or doesn't provide for them to do it, because the Constitution should be and is the supreme law of our land.
Right.
So if I had could wave a magic wand, I would say that that type of ruling needs to be overturned, and the judges ought to have the right to give the people the right that the Constitution gives them, which is to enforce the provisions in there through legal means.
Right. No. Okay. I love that. Well, Judge, thank you so much for coming in and
Very
being
enjoyable.
one of the inaugural guests here.
And I wish you all the success in the world. I think you're eminently well suited for this.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.